All right, we've got Zach Bivens on the left, a very well-known name, popular name in
Oh
the
ja,
Lorcana.
Zach
I
Bivens,
love Zach
hervorragend. Da krieg
Bivens
ich ja wieder
for his
Views
ingenuity. Every single time we see him in a
von
Disney
seinen
Lorcana
Fans.
challenge, I feel like he brings something
Shoutout to
interesting to the
Zach
table. And then
Bivens
we also have
Fans.
Shane Severs there on the
Und eine
right. I
7
believe Zach
mehr, ja?
Bivens is playing an Emerald deck, and then Shane is playing a Steel Sapphire deck.
Yeah, anybody who's watched these streams is familiar with Zach. He's played in both the previous challenges and placed very highly.
Wow.
I do not think he's cracked the top 16,
played
though.
dieses
So something
Deck.
I think he's fighting for
Das ist ja
today.
geil.
And yeah, with this deck that
Da bin ich
that
gespannt. Mit
I think a
bestimmten
lot of people
Uses.
talked about
Under the
this Amber
Sea.
Emerald deck. It had some tools in this latest set in Ursula's Return
steht
that made it kind of a
4-0-2 und sein
viable deck in
Gegner
the
auch.
competitive scene. And everybody was waiting for it to kind of like break into the mainstream, and it never quite did. Although it's always been lurking as a deck that has some promise.
It has. It's been a bit of a sleeper deck, and to be honest, if anybody's going to be able to crack
Ich
it,
bin
I
super
think
gespannt,
Zach
was
is one
dieser
of the
Zach
players who
auslassen wird.
can. We see him on turn 1 playing
Weil der
his
ist echt
Diablo,
strong.
getting a
Letztens
good
hat er noch
look
so
at
Skillsong
Shane's
gezockt,
hand,
glaube ich,
taking some time to study it too.
in
This
Chicago.
is how you know you're playing against a good player. They don't just look at your hand and
erstmal
say, okay, you can take it
Diablo
back. He
turn
really
2.
takes time to memorize the cards that he's going to have to play
Was?
around with Shane,
Dieser
and then
Discard.
immediately playing a Bare Necessities to, now that he knows what's in Shane's hand, knows that he can play the Bare Necessities and potentially
Ja, warum nimmt
get
er
rid
denn
of a card. Looking at that Baboon,
aber auch
wanting to
Baboon
keep
wird
that
weggetan? Er
Diablo
könnte doch auch den
nice
Fischfuchsquill
and
greifen, oder?
healthy
Ich
and
meine,
not
any
banished.
Non-Character.
Yeah, I mean, took a look, knew exactly what it had.
Aber
Knew
er nimmt
that Baboon
natürlich den
had to
Baboon,
go
damit der
and
Diablo
played right
überlebt.
into it. And now the Diablo, of course, exerted and going to start giving Zach extra cards on Shane's turn.
And we did see
Damit
Shane
er erstmal
play
rein
that Fortis
hat
Sphere on turn
Zack
1.
gezogen.
A great card that just
Ich
says
weiß gar nicht, ob er es jetzt gerade gemacht hat.
Combos very well with
Eventuell war too busy, seine Tinte so zusammenraffen.
Flaversham that can banish an item.
Das müsste man
here we see
eigentlich
Shane
nochmal
playing a popsicle
zurückspulen.
as well, and then inking for the
Ich will leider
turn
gerade nicht
acid.
sehen.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not sure Zach took a card off the popsicle there. It's one thing to note. I think it's a May ability on the Diablo, so you can choose whether or not to take it. And
Ja, Zach, wie
Zach
spielst du
perhaps
denn?
choosing not to take it off the popsicle there.
Du hättest die vom Popsicle die auch noch reinziehen können.
Inking a Kita. I think that's the second big Kita that we've seen him ink so far, so just something to keep in mind. I imagine seeing these Kitas in this deck, you know, we talked about
Interessant, was er da für ein Deck
this deck
zwiebelt.
people looked at Under the Sea as a new song card utilizing the Sing Together mechanic that was new to Ursula's Return. And Under the Sea, I love this card because it sends all of the opposing characters to the bottom of their deck under a certain strength. So I'm led to believe that, or if I had to guess, since we see this Kita and we know that Songs is something this deck wants to play, I would be surprised.
Interessant, hat so eine Variante mit mehr Discard irgendwie, aber ja.
I wouldn't be surprised either. You know, this deck is kind of a control deck. Emerald is not.
mich, ob
Emerald and
ein
Amber
Uses
are
im
not
Deck
two
auch hat.
colors that are
Und
really
Ariel,
known for
bestimmt
their
ja.
board control. Except Emerald does have a lot of cards that bounce cards back to opponents' hands. And
Am
there
Ende
are
auch noch
some
Ursula
cards
und
in
so.
Emerald
Oh,
that
dieses
do
Deck
this.
sieht cool aus
There's
ohne
the
Ende.
Muses that are
Wie
out
aber auch
there.
4 und 2
We
damit
talked
ist
about Runde does this
sensational.
as an action. Under the Sea is
Aber
another
ey,
one
ich
you
wüsste auch
highlighted.
nicht, was
You
ich
draw
machen
cards
sollte,
that
wenn ich
allow you
dagegen
to control
spiele.
the board through bouncing cards back to your opponent's hand. And as you pointed out, Kita sets up for that Under the Sea card very, very nicely. So Zach possibly angling to do that in the late game.
And oh my goodness, we see a pretty big Ursula Deceiver being played here. Shane revealing 2 Grab Your Sword. A very threatening card against this board state with the Prince John and the Diablo, both only having 2 willpower, so they would be banished if Shane plays Grab Your Sword next turn, which he absolutely
Das sind
can.
Musen,
He
ne?
has the Fishbone Quill, which means as long as,
Nee,
well,
das
as, long
ist-
as
das
Fishbone Quill
ist,
stays around
his
until the next turn, then
SB
Shane
Pegasus.
can ink any card from his hand, meaning that he would be able to ink up to
Paint
5,
the
play
Roses
this Grab Your
red?
Sword, and banish
Wow.
both the Prince John and the Diablo. I think we see Zach Bivens questing with both of them here, knowing that they're probably not long for this world.
That is true. Painting the Roses Red, another card that we don't see
ja, jetzt
terribly
kommt noch
often
ein
in the
Grab Your
competitive
Sword.
meta. Not blue, not green, not aquamarine. We're painting the roses red. This card is another card that manipulates your opponent's character strengths, again playing into that Kita.
Wow, Herr
play
Kotzmar, was
later
für
on.
ein Spam.
I'm definitely starting to see a theme here with Zach
Ordentlich
Bivens'
gerimt.
deck. It cares a lot about reducing strength, and as you
Ja,
mentioned
da ist
earlier,
das
there's
zweite
quite
Grab
a
Your Sword.
few ways you can control the board with different Amber and Emerald actions and characters that care about strength specifically. So I'm eager to see what else Zach pulls out of this, just because, like I said, Painting the Roses Red isn't a card we typically see. I love that it replaces itself. You get to draw a card when you play the card, but otherwise you don't see the negative strength part of this action used very frequently.
No, that's true.
Was denn? Zack hat jetzt schon nichts mehr?
Let's see what's here for turn 5 play. I do want to talk a little bit about Shane, though. We've talked a lot about Zach and what he's trying to do. Shane, I would argue we're seeing some of the cards that he wants to be playing in the early game, getting items on the board for Hiram. and then a Fishbone Quill out to allow him to put extra ink in the inkwell, really
Toll
getting
ist
that
die Hand von
resource
Shane ja
advantage
nicht.
this deck wants to build. But Zach has really been putting some hand pressure on Shane here, getting rid of, you know, what, 3 cards, I think, at this point from his hand, which is, that's ink that Shane wants to be putting in the inkwell and eventually play a whole new world. So Shane's kind of on the back foot here just with his
Zach
hand
sieht gut
disadvantage.
vorne aus.
Right, I think Shane's especially hurting because we haven't seen a Flaversham, or sometimes players like to play a whole new world in this deck as well, just as a way to refill your hand. One of my Sapphire Steel is a deck that I love to watch being played.
Rise of the Titans auch
their
eher
ability
schlecht.
to get ink
das jetzt
into
in die
their
Tinte?
inkwell
Ja.
well very quickly. We see Fishbone
Geschickt
Quill
mit dem
being
Fishbone
played.
Quill, um
That's
nicht zu zeigen,
another
was es ist.
way that Shane is removing cards from his hand, so it's hurting him
Oh, der
even
Diablo wird
more.
erschöpft.
And like you mentioned, Zach Bivens also taking cards out of Shane's hand. He doesn't have any cards in hand now, but typically the Sapphire Steel deck wants to ramp into a 5-cost character, which you can then sing a whole new world. And we don't see that or a Hiram in play yet.
Yeah, and here we see another card that we don't see terribly
haben.
often in the meta, although it's one that people were excited about when the set started. It's Cricky, Lucky Cricket from Mulan. This is a 3/4 with 3 lore, and when you play this character, your other characters get +3
Das ist
strength
doch
this
Crikey
turn.
einfach.
So not something that Zach utilized there, but a 3 lore character on the board now.
4 Cheeseburger so mitten in der Mitte.
Pretty quickly.
I actually love this card personally because I think it plays a great offensive and defensive role as a card. When you play the card, like you mentioned, you're boosting the strength of all of your other characters, which means if your opponent has
da ist
a
die
bunch of
area.
characters on their board and they're exerted, you can use it to surprise your opponent.
And
with
then paint the
favorable
roses
trades.
red.
And then once Cricky's
Legt das
done
in die
that job,
Tinte oder
he
cycelt
quests for
es
3
aus.
lore, so you can put on a lot of pressure just by having him on board, gaining 3 lore every turn if your opponent doesn't have a way to banish it.
Könnte cyclen
It
mit
is
Ursula.
a lucky bug.
We do see an Aerial Spectacular Singer played this turn as well, I believe, to look at the top 4 cards of Zach's deck and then put one in hand if he finds one. And then we see a Sir Hiss. This is an interesting card we don't normally see.
Ja,
no, this is it doesn't synergize with much else in the deck, but it is a turn 2 play that he can play on curve, and it's evasive, so probably an answer for Diablo in the meta.
Yes, yeah, it has 3 strength, only 1 willpower, but enough strength to banish a Diablo, even a Diablo that's had a hidden cove.
Hidden cove, I was gonna say.
Yeah, we see a lot of hidden coves being played in Emerald Steel, so it still gets around that as well. And
Mehr
then,
Cogsworth.
pretty great 2-drop, like you mentioned, being
Kann
able to
auf
quest
jeden
for
Fall mal
one
den
every
Diablo
turn.
weghauen.
If your characters don't have evasive, you can't challenge other evasive
Mit
characters.
Mickey die
So
Ursula hauen,
just adding a
genau, mit
little bit of
Cogsworth den
extra
Diablo,
pressure.
One-Drop.
Yes. Now Shane here using some of his, of course,
Genau.
Zach pointing out there that Mickey has, or Shane pointing out Mickey has resist, so not taking any damage there because of the Cogsworth. But Shane trying to remove as much lore as
Da hätte
possible
man, glaube ich,
from
auch den
Zach's
Judge
side of the
rufen
board.
können.
Zach is threatening to run away with this game here,
Beziehungsweise auch
particularly
sollen.
with that 3 lore Cricky on the board.
Yeah, unfortunately for Shane, we
Weil
still
A
haven't found
spielt
much of
doch
a
mal
card draw
vernünftig
option,
Lorcana.
but these 2 Cogsworth in play are giving
Wisst, wie die
everything
Regeln
else resist
sind. Ihr
+1.
spielt das
They're not
fette
giving
Turnier.
themselves resist +1, but each Cogsworth is
Oh,
giving the
nice.
other one resist +1. And so it creates an interesting thing here where Cogsworth allows you to make favorable trades. You see how wide Zach is going.
Wobei das
So
3 Lore
Shane
gekostet
really
hat.
needs to challenge a bunch of the characters to bring them down, especially since we're not finding cards like Grab Your Sword, or at least we found them earlier, and then Zach was able to get rid of them with some of the song removal cards that he has available to them. Unfortunately
Dass
for
noch so
Shane,
Board
though,
Control
the
gemacht
Mickey
hat.
and the Cogsworth, they don't have a lot
Das
of
sind
strength.
Musen, oder?
And so for some of the characters on Zach's side of the board are evasive with the Diablos and the Sir Hiss. But also these Crickies, those Crickies have 4 willpower, so it takes a bit of challenging with these characters that don't have a ton of strength just to get rid of a couple threats. We see another Cricky being played here as well. Just those
Fingernägel
2
machen mich echt
Crickies
fertig.
are 6 lore on board. Zach's already at 14 lore. If Shane doesn't have an answer to this, the game may be over.
Ja, Ende. Zach gewinnt.
We're going to
Wenn
see
nicht
what
nächste, dann übernächste
Shane
Runde.
is looking at. Okay, so Shane does find the whole new world. I think he sings it with Cogsworth. This is honestly exactly what he needed. You don't love
Jetzt kann er noch
singing
so
a whole
Tinkerbell
new world
rauslegen,
when there's a Diablo
aber dann
in
ist er trotzdem
play,
defeated.
because
Weil er
the
den Crikey-Ring
Diablo
wegmachen
let
muss.
Zach
Ach so,
draw
kann
a
jetzt noch
card for
7
every
ziehen, wenn er
card
will.
that Shane draws. So Zach
Macht
has to
er es auch.
discard his hand, draw 7 from the whole new world, and then he gets basically 7 instances of deciding if he wants to draw an extra card for all 7 cards that Shane drew. And we see Zach just filling up his hand
Ja, er geht
with
einfach auf
cards. He
14,
should
scheiß
have
drauf.
close to a 14-card hand
Weil es ist nicht so,
here
als ob
after
jetzt
the
noch
whole
ein
new world, but
AWM
it's
kommt.
something Shane had to do in order to have a chance of getting back into this game.
Right. I mean, you have to play to your outs, right? And that is his out. Whether or not it helps
Es
his
reicht
opponents,
aber
what he
nicht.
needed to do. The bummer for Shane
Weil
is
die beiden Crikeys
this deck likes to
gewinnen auf jeden
take
Fall.
advantage of a whole new world by having
heißt
a
jetzt,
lot
Tinkerbell
more
reicht
resources
nicht.
at its disposal when it does it. than your opponent. So in theory, Shane would love to have a lot more ink
Grab your
in his
sword
ink world to be able to do more than Zach with those cards that he gave him.
Ja, klar.
But because of that discard in the early game, he wasn't able to generate that resource advantage.
Unfortunately, I don't think Shane found what he wanted to with that whole world. He played 2 popsicles. I mean, when Zach has 14 cards in hand, what's an extra 2? You know,
right?
If you're playing the popsicles, letting him draw off the Diablo, at this point, Shane just has to find his out.
Tja, Shane.
Yeah, that's true. And there are some things available. Grab your sword, but didn't find it, and there it is.
Da hätte ich mich auch für Fistbump entschieden.
But again, it's a tough position to be in.
Yeah, Grab Your Sword definitely would have helped. I know we saw at least 2 of them earlier in the game. I don't think it's very typical for Sapphire Steel lists to play more than 2 or 3 of them normally. So knowing that there were already 2 in the discard, I feel like Zach could pretty safely go wide. Even if you have something like a Tinkerbell's only going to deal 1 damage when it enters play, and of course the Diablos. It would have gotten rid of the hisses, but the Diablos are things to be worried about. So I think it was just unfortunate for Shane that he didn't find some of that draw faster. I feel like if you were able to find a Hiram Flaversham or even
das Deck habe ich auch probiert zu bauen, kurz bevor sie Pixelborn abgestellt haben. Deswegen bin ich nie dazu gekommen, das vernünftig zu tunen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Irgendwann wäre es
really,
bestimmt gut gewesen. Meine ursprüngliche Version wäre erstmal Schrott.
The Hiram there mid-game when Zach is putting on that hand pressure. You know, 2, 3 cards picking here and there. Didn't see a Bucky in this list, which we're so used to seeing in Emerald. So we didn't see a Bucky this game. We just saw targeted hand removal, and it did enough that, yeah.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how they approach
Ich glaube auch, Zach wird gar keine Bucky spielen. Er spielt zwar Diablo und Kida, aber ich glaube, sonst hat er nicht viel. Er hat auch noch so über Forgotten.
So I think there's going to be a big advantage there because
ich denke nicht, dass er noch Flynn Rider und so spielt.
Theoretically a turn earlier than Zach does, and if you're able to ramp a bit faster, get a 5-cost character played, and then potentially a whole new world early, or even landing a Hiram Flaversham, then maybe you can find some of those answers. You can counter some of that targeted hand removal that Zach is playing against as well. Find some of your removal for the wide board.
Weil Flynn Rider ist natürlich
more of the removal, direct removal cards from Steel.
Yeah, and before we bring you the next game, we're really excited to do it. We're going to go to a quick break, and then we're going to see if Zach managed to take game 2 as well.
Was? Okay. Nicht jetzt die Mid-Game Break. Wie lang kann die denn sein? Wahrscheinlich nicht so lang, ne? Ist ja spektakulär. Be right back. Ja, wann denn? Naja, mal gucken.
Granted, that deck, it was so spicy, I had to take a break before game 2.
Honestly,
it hit me by surprise.
That's not the first time Zach has, like, taken us off of our feet. Like, he does it every time. That's why I say it. Every time I see Zach play, I'm excited to see him play because I never know what he has for us.
Yeah. So I am excited to this next game because this kind of deck has a early game and a mid game and a late game that are very different, and we didn't get to that late game.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see if we do this time.
Yeah. Let's get on to the next game and see what happens. Okay, both players seem to have finished their altar. Yep. Like I said, I think Shane gets to go first in this game. We see him inking a Rise of the Titans. Doesn't need that for this matchup. And playing
Dann sind wir mal gespannt. Boah, dieser Zach Bivens. Kein Wunder, dass er so ein Fan-Favorite ist. ist gut und zockt
I love this card, to be honest with you. It's just, there's something about it being so simple. It's a one-cost item. You play it, you draw a card. It basically makes your 60-card deck a 56-card deck.
All right, so we did see game 1. Zach played the Diablo on turn 1. That was turn 1 play. No turn 1 play here. So a Fortisphere going in on Shane's side, followed by a Smee on turn 2.
Ja, Zack nix in Turn 1. Was hat er denn? Bestimmt Diablo und Kida gibt's in seinem Deck.
Very well statted for a turn 2 play.
Aber hat er weder noch gezogen.
Allows you to either
spielt auch Sun Chill.
If your opponent is playing aggressively, or get you 2, 4, or 6 lore right off the bat.
I think this is a powerful play from Shane, especially since Zach missed his 1-drop. You know that Smee's likely going to be able to quest on this turn, gain 2 lore. You do see an Ursula Deceiver being played.
Sind ein bisschen an das Deck mit dem
because it's the only song
damals zu Set 2 Release.
It's already starting. This hand targeting
das Battlebärs Kaiserslautern Tournament gewonnen wurde.
But Smee has lots of
von dem Herrn mit seinem Prinz John.
Going to gain 2 lore, and then also if Zach decides to challenge with the Ursula, which he probably won't because it wouldn't.
Damals war auch noch Grand Duke im Deck und so. Es war ein ganz anderes Metagame und das Deck hat auch nie wieder was gemacht. Außer dieses erste Turn von 1 zu gewinnen. Aber jetzt hat Zach Bivens das retuned mit 2 weiteren Sets und wie gesagt, das hätte ich auch gerne gemacht. Sein Deck sieht echt cool aus.
The cards in your hand to do it, and when you're playing a deck like
Bin gespannt, ob ich das nächste Woche fett sehen werde auf den Champs. Das sieht doch aus wie was Leute nachbauen, wenn ich das nicht nachbaue.
That's a tough decision to make.
Aber ich habe Angst, dass ich dann so ein Mirror Match spielen muss. Das ist bestimmt wack.
Players like to lean towards a certain ramp option. There's Fishbone Quill, which you see in the majority of Sapphire decks, and then depending on the Sapphire deck, some people like to play One Jump Ahead, which is a 2-cost song. You can play it, take the top card from your deck, putting it into the Inkwell, or you can play Mickey Mouse Detective, which does the exact same thing, but it's 3 ink, uninkable,
Mann, diesen
and
Quickie habe ich echt unterschätzt. Ich dachte, dass einfach Schrott ist.
Scenario would rather see the Mickey Mouse Detective for a couple reasons.
Aber ne, jetzt sehe ich, dass ich mich offensichtlich geirrt habe. Nicht nur, weil Leute den spielen, sondern auch, weil ich sehe, wie er gut funktioniert, was er so macht.
Cards like the Bare Necessities, targeting item cards as well. So to get around having to discard a Fishbone Quill or One Jump Ahead, a Mickey Mouse Detective would be a perfect card in this scenario, being able to play it, still doing what Fishbone's trying to do in this case, which is, I think, just getting Shane to 5 inks so you can play a 5 or 6 ink character.
And I think those 2 cards, talking about hand pressure here, Zach has just managed to empty Shane's hand.
Shane hat nichts mehr.
Forced to discard that Hiram Flaversham, which he really wanted to play this turn to recharge his hand and keep him going. So
ja, was machst du jetzt? 4 Ink, 0 Handkarten.
Hiram Flaversham could have kept Shane
Zum
in
Glück
this
hast du
game.
Zeit.
I mean, the game's not over by any means. Of course. But Shane not having any cards in hand and playing a deck that has
Die Frage ist aber, was machst du jetzt? Machst du jetzt 2 mit dem Smee? Nee, du haust die Ursula und heilst ihn dann mit dem Popsicle.
Or draw a card. The Hiram Flaversham could alleviate that a lot. I think Zach has a great understanding of that and knowing, okay, I won't develop a character this turn. Shane doesn't have very many characters on his side of the board, just the Mr. Smee. I don't have to worry about the Mr. Smee that much because it's not going to gain a ton of lore over the course of the game unless we heal it here with Popsicle. And then now that Shane doesn't have any cards in hand, I have plenty of cards in my hand. I can start building a wide board and hopefully end this game quickly.
Shane choosing to challenge the Ursula Deceiver, remove it there, and as you said, use the Popsicle to heal that damage. Shane
ich frage mich, ob er auch so Cinderella One-Drop
at the end of that turn, being exerted.
Die dürfen jetzt mal lecker durchgelesen werden.
Another card. I was hoping we would see this card. I'm very excited. This is the Muses,
Und immer wenn du einen Song spielst, bounce einen mit 2 oder weniger Power. Damit kann man super geil seine eigene Ariel immer wieder bouncen mit dem Song, den man damit gated hat für Infinite Songs. Das werden wir eventuell jetzt gleich auch sehen, wenn wir nicht stattdessen was anderes sehen
I think this is going to be a very difficult card for Shane to answer, to be honest with you, because unlike an ink like Ruby that has access to cards that can get around Ward in a way, forcing your opponent to choose their character with Ward because characters with Ward can't be chosen by their opponents, Shane's only options really to these Muses is with cards like Grab Your Sword and Tinkerbell. Muses has 4 willpower, which is a lot. So even a
ich glaube, man haut auch mit den Musen rein für 2.
And I don't see Zach exerting the Muses anytime soon.
Für 2 zu viel Magic spielen. Ich würde einen Rohr machen mit der Muse.
But we've seen a couple of action
cards
und dann schwer. Cards in general that reduce strength in Zach's deck, so I'm starting to see where this is headed.
Prince John ist ja jetzt eher nicht so toll. Die Karte ganz links sehe ich auch irgendwie so uninkable. Was hat er denn da jetzt?
So anything that Shane plays that also doesn't
Paint the Roses red mit den Muses.
in which he may have to discard.
Combo, daran habe ich ja gar nicht gedacht.
Deck is playing out.
Damit könnte er diesen Smee bouncen zum Beispiel.
Yeah, it's a fascinating card. And
weil die Action erst wie so oft, wenn dann die Trigger in die Berg gehen und dann on Resolution to Smee, ja, ist stark. Ariel. Die ist krass. Da braucht man Kida und Under the Sea, sonst kann man die gar nicht wegmachen. Aber mit der Combo geht es dann. Erstmal noch Prince John. Ich finde, das geht nicht, die hat Ward. Da würde ich den Judge rufen. Das war doch Zach Bivens Pro-Play.
And of course, Shane has 3 items to Zach's 0. So this Ariel can be
nimmt zurück die Ariel.
5 lore, basically untouched for the same reason that the Muses are going to be a problem for Shane.
Mit den Muses hätte ich noch einen gemacht letzte Runde schon.
Until Ariel is exerted and can be challenged.
Also ich weiß nicht, was ist mit diesem Zach Bivens. Entweder schlecht gespielt oder einfach gefuscht. So Fuschversuch. Das ist der Klassiker. So TrashT, Fetzi. Magic im Ruhrgebiet-Play.
Return Ariel back to his hand and then able to use that enter play trigger again.
Yeah,
weißt du dann, wo nämlich halt stattdessen im Mr. Smee. Ja. Hätte ich genauso gespielt. Heutzutage nicht mehr, mich zu faul für. Ruf ich über den Judge, wenn der Gegner es probiert. Das geht nicht, die hat Ward. Das ist unfassbar.
We don't talk about Bruno as a great card for this, especially when Shane is at no cards in hand.
Wie geil, er kann es gar nicht ausspielen. Er kann es ausspielen auf seine eigene Area, aber er kann es in die Tinte machen mit Fishbone-Quellen. Wird er wohl hoffentlich auch machen. Weil ansonsten, wenn Zack die Handkarte discardet, kann er noch eine ziehen mit Prince John. Natürlich machst du das jetzt in die Tinte rein. Come on, bro.
With Ward, yeah. So nothing targetable there or choosable. Can't choose any of them, and I'm sure Shane knows that if he keeps Along Came Zeus in his hand, it's very likely to just be discarded the next turn, so opts to use his Fishbone Quill and at least put it into his Inkwell, giving him a little bit of extra ink to work on for whatever Shane top
stark.
And then we did see Cricket here, using that ability we talked about earlier to increase the strength of his characters, making Muse able to challenge and remove that aerial item collector.
He is such a strong card, man. I feel like it comes out of nowhere. Unless you're expecting it, it's super hard to play around because you just don't normally see this card. We've seen it a couple times today. People have been teching it in to just have these surprise turns.
Aber jetzt endlich Along Came Zeus auf den Quickie.
Trade with something that they weren't expecting, getting rid of that aerial, which otherwise would be difficult to get rid of with just the characters that Zach had on board.
But you know what Cricket does not have? Ward. So Shane finally with the target for that Along Came Zeus, hurls a Thunderbolt and takes that off the board.
Which is great because Cricky does.
Tja, wenn Shane jetzt den Charakter zieht, macht er schon wieder nichts. Und das ist total geil, weil obwohl er 0 Handkarten hat, kann man dann trotzdem noch eine ziehen mit dem Prince John.
Noch mehr Prince John.
Krass.
Jetzt
Grab Your Sword von oben wäre super stark.
You may not want to exert them
Rip it.
Prince John is drawing you cards when Shane's discarding cards. And
weil ich weiß nicht, wie gut es war, dieses Along Came Zeus, We Don't Talk About Bruno in die Tinte zu tun. Weil das ist ja die Karte, mit der man den Gegner zwingen kann zu discarden, auch wenn man 0 Handkarten hat, um noch mit Prince John zu ziehen. Aber er hat vielleicht einfach noch eins. Naja, er hatte auch noch eins und Under the Sea, das war natürlich die Karte, die man nicht hitten konnte vorhin. AWNW von oben. Nice. Aber Zach wird natürlich, jetzt wird ja wahrscheinlich nicht Grab Your Sword kommen. Das heißt, Zach kann jetzt erst gleich erstmal ein bisschen die Hand von Shane wieder angehen, seine eigene Hand vollziehen. Und dann muss Shane schon wieder das nächste AWNW ziehen.
So both of these players have a fresh hand of 7 cards. We'll see what Shane can do with it. Being able to ink return and ink with the Fishbone Quill, I think should have 4 ink total to work with on this turn.
Yeah, that was the way back into this game, especially having the Fishbone Quill allowing you to continue.
Aber ich glaube, Zach gewinnt trotzdem locker. Was ein cooles Deck.
Unfortunately for him, used a lot of ink to do that, and Zach is showing 6 lore on the board and has already climbed his way up to 6, so going to start putting pressure on there. But speaking of lore pressure, we have Bell, Strange but Special.
Yes, I think this is going to turn into a race. Sapphire is notorious for finding a card like Lucky
Aber diese Bell ist ja nicht schwer wegzumachen.
Like Bell or the Aerials or
da musst du irgendeinen Song machen, dann kann er sie mit den Musen einfach zurückschicken. Die rausspielen, hat es nicht so super gekonnt.
Which I think Zach could win in the next turn or two if nothing changed about the board state. But if Shane has 10 ink in his Inkwell, this Bell is going to be questing for 5 lore. It may not be questing very much because you don't want Zach to challenge any the bell and discard
Lucky Dime discard.
We see the dime. So Zach has a very interesting decision here. Any of these cards can be banished. He has to consider banishing the Fortisphere, the Baboom, or the Lucky Dime.
Ja, natürlich nimmt er den Dime.
Lets him banish a non-character
Bounce
card.
jetzt auch noch
die. For the Lucky Dime, knowing
Wen
that
bounce er
Shane
denn?
could play it next turn and
Mit der
immediately
Muse.
gain a 5 lore
Bounce
off
einfach
of
gar keinen
Bell.
oder was?
And then so long as Dime is in play,
Ja.
he has to be worried
Den
of
Musentrigger macht er auf die Ariel.
an Ariel being played, or a Thomas
Das ist natürlich nice. Hat er noch einen Song, um die Welt zu bouncen.
Absolutely. I mean, with the amount of ink on the board, that Dime is potentially
Ja,
a
hat er.
turn clock, enabling Shane to get 10 lore.
Ja, vielleicht spielt er einfach nur flüchtig und ist unkonzentriert. Er ist ja auch schon so gut wie durch, oder? Ne, noch nicht ganz. Klar, mit Draw, wobei jetzt hat er schon 37. Wenn er jetzt noch gewinnt, ist er durch. 44 müsste reichen.
Zach played another Bare Necessities after that and discarded the Fortisphere, and then I think played a You've Forgotten Me? Yeah. So gets rid of Shane's entire hand in this.
Meine ich ganz. Ich glaube, 5 Wins und 4 Draws ist der Cut. Und er hat jetzt gerade 4 Wins und 2 Draws. Das heißt, wenn er jetzt gewinnt, ist er immer noch nicht sicher durch. Muss er nochmal gewinnen oder zweimal drawn. Die Frage ist, ob man noch so reindrawt.
Yeah, it looks like too many cards to have in your hand.
Ja, Zach hat unendlich viele an Karten.
Yeah. No, that's great. So Zach now with 5 lore showing in the board is sitting at 10, so 2 turns away. Of course, Shane with plenty of removal options. I don't think we've seen Grab Your Swords yet.
I don't think so. I don't think he's found one to be discarded. The unfortunate thing, though, is even if Shane does find a Grab Your Swords, let's say he finds one, plays it next turn. Look at all the cards in Zach's hand.
So many cards.
He's just going to throw down a bunch more cards that you're going to then need another answer for. And I mean, when you have that many options, Zach has to take a second to look through all of the cards available to him. What's the best play? He decides to play an Aerial Spectacular.
Hätte er mal nicht vorher erkundet, dann hätte er das jetzt mit den Musen noch singen können. Noch 2 zu ziehen und einen abzuwerfen. Wobei das fast schon Overkill gewesen wäre, weil er muss Angst haben, dass jetzt noch ein AWNW kommt. Der fast schon Deckout ist. Mickey from the top erstmal nicht so toll.
I think we're going to have one more
Wie lange ist da auseinander anzugucken? Voll gut.
Find the whole new world. I think you said it perfectly. Forcing Zach to ditch all of those cards. You getting a fresh 7 cards. Zach gets a fresh 7 cards, but that's a lot better than however many cards he has in hand right now. And then you're just going to have to claw your way back after. I'm assuming Zach is going to.
So langsam würde ich vielleicht auch mal die Musen selbst bouncen und sie wieder ausspielen, damit die nicht auch noch am Grab Your Sword drauf geht.
Probably the full amount. We'll see. Yeah, a whole new world into a Grab Your Swords would be nice, but there it is, 6 lore, bringing Zach up to 16, 4 lore away from victory. And Shane now going to top deck here, see if he can find the answers. Another
mehr Musen, schon mal nice.
I like what Zach's doing here, just playing out his characters, probably knowing that Shane's only out here is something like a whole new world, and then finding some sort of removal.
Weil wenn jetzt Whole New World und Grab Your Sword kommt, hat er immer noch 4 lore on table und hat Lethal. Oder wie auch immer, 100% Mac Completion.
I think that Kita there, an interesting choice, but it does give you a 5 willpower character on the board.
Ich sollte demnächst meine Lore Total auch so aufschreiben, einfach in Prozent. Wie defeated der Gegner schon ist.